The chaos that engulfed Tanzania did not begin with her.
Niko tayari kusikiliza wenzangu.
So, who is the problem? Walk with me. Tanzania, a land of about 75 million souls. Once known as Tanganyika, a beacon of peace in East Africa. For decades, it stood tall as the one nation that had never been stained by political blood since independence in 1962. But on October 29th, 2025, everything changed. Tanzania was no longer the peaceful country many of us once knew. The streets that once echoed with laughter now trembled under homes and shops destroyed. What once seemed unthinkable became reality. So how did we get here? Or better still, how did Tanzania ever be the same again? People lost their others lost their And let me tell you this, good people, what you have seen online, that was only smoke. You haven't seen the fire itself. At Lifelens TV, we've reviewed raw footage, images too graphic to show here. What they reveal is not just chaos, but a carefully orchestrated campaign to silence dissent. It was planned, calculated, executed with precision by someone determined to cling to power, no matter the cost.
Watu wafuatao waweze kukamatwa, wapelekwe kwenye vyombo vya sheria.
She, Mama Samia, wasn't the one, but someone else was. Behind the government's tight grip on information, behind the total blackout of the internet and communication lines, something darker unfolded. Hidden beneath layers of propaganda and fear. If you could see what really happened, you would ask yourself, where did we lose our humanity? Let me paint you a picture. Have you ever seen how logs are arranged when someone is preparing to make charcoal? That is exactly how the Tanzanian police handled arranging their fellow citizens, lifting them with caterpillar tractors and dumping them into the river like waste. This is not an exaggeration. It's a grim truth. A truth buried under silence and shadows. 23,000 people. Yes, you heard that right. 23,000 lives in just 3 days. Some call it a crackdown. Others refuse to sugarcoat it. An online campaign led by activists like Cyprian Isniakundi has been collecting signatures to force the world to call it what it was. And from everything we've seen, that is exactly what it was. A dark, methodical chapter that will stain Tanzania's history. The sequence began the day after the vote. On October 30th, an order went out. According to Tanzanian activists abroad, voices we've corroborated where possible, 38 young men and women accused of setting fire to the home of President Samia Suluhu's son were rounded up and But the actors were not ordinary officers. Witnesses and sources described them as a secret, hardened unit. Trained, some say, in techniques learned in conflict zones abroad. They answered to no one visible. To ordinary Tanzanians, they looked like ghosts. To those ordering them, they were instruments of. This unit did not operate on loyalty to a single woman in State House. They drew orders from elsewhere, from a shadow power whose name many whisper but few dare publish. Who is that man? Walk with me.
Wanangu vijana wa Tanzania. Nchi hii ni yenu.
It's easy, almost convenient, to place all the blame for Tanzania's collapse on one woman, President Samia Suluhu Hassan. But the truth runs much deeper than her presidency. What happened to Tanzania is not just about who sits at State House, it's about what sits beneath it. To understand the chaos of today, we must go back to the roots of the Chama cha Mapinduzi, CCM, the party that has ruled Tanzania since independence. For decades, CCM was more than just a political party. It was the very spine of the nation's identity, but hidden within its structure lies the seed of its current crisis. It became the oldest and most dominant ruling party in East Africa, a symbol of stability. But like all symbols of power that stand too long, cracks began to form. And those cracks split wide open in 2015, the year former President Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete was leaving office. That transition, my friends, is where the rain began to beat Tanzania.
Maana siku zote nimekuwa nikiwaomba viongozi wenzangu.
Because behind the speeches and celebrations of a peaceful handover, a dangerous playbook was being written. The Kikwete Playbook of Power. You see, in African politics, there is a recurring disease, a refusal to let go of power. When constitutions say 2 terms, many leaders find another way. If they cannot stay in office legally, they install a proxy, a puppet who will sit on the throne while the real ruler pulls the strings from behind the curtain. That was Kikwete's plan. He wanted to remain the invisible hand, the silhouette president, governing through a loyal figurehead who would obey him without question. But fate, as it often does, had other ideas. When the time came to select CCM's next presidential flag bearer, 38 members threw their names into the ring. Among them were seasoned diplomats, technocrats, and politicians, each with their own backers and ambitions. But one thing was clear: Kikwete had his man. He had a candidate he believed he could control. Someone pliable, someone he could keep in his palm like a chess piece. Then came the first round of voting. The results shocked everyone, including Kikwete himself. Only 5 candidates advanced to the second round. John Pombe Magufuli, Minister of Works, known for his toughness and no-nonsense attitude. Amina Salem Ali, Tanzania's permanent representative to the African Union. Asha Rose Migiro, former UN Deputy Secretary General and Minister of Foreign Affairs. Bernard Membe, then Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. January Makamba, Deputy Minister of Communication, Science and Technology. Behind the thick curtains of power, President Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete had already written his own ending, and his successor's beginning. His man was Bernard Membe, his longtime foreign minister, the face of Tanzania's diplomacy, the keeper of his image and perhaps the custodian of his legacy. But within CCM, a quiet rebellion was brewing. The party that had for decades bowed to the will of its chairman was beginning to tire of hand-picked heirs. Whispers of change rustled through the corridors of Lumumba. When the Central Committee trimmed the presidential list to 5, Membe made the cut, but his victory was short-lived. In the next round, he was struck off before the final 3. The shock was seismic. For the first time in CCM's long and obedient history, a sitting party chairman's grip had been broken from within. When the votes were finally cast, Kikwete's grand design fell apart. And from the ruins of that failed plan rose a man few had taken seriously: John Pombe Joseph Magufuli. The nomination sent tremors through the political establishment. Kikwete was blindsided, but not beaten. And that, my friends, is where the battle for Tanzania's soul truly began. He still held one last card, the running mate. That is where Mama Samia Suluhu Hassan entered the scene. For years, Samia had worked quietly in Kikwete's orbit. She served in the Vice President's office, handled delicate union matters between the mainland and Zanzibar, and briefed him personally on issues too sensitive for public view. She was calm, disciplined, and most importantly, loyal. So when Magufuli's name unexpectedly rose, Kikwete intervened, subtly pushing for her to join the ticket. It was not a random choice. He needed someone inside Magufuli's government, someone he could trust, someone who would listen. And just like that, Samia became the familiar heartbeat inside a new body of power. To the public, she was the perfect complement to Magufuli's fiery character. Gentle, balanced, and measured. But within CCM's inner circles, her appointment carried a different meaning. A symbol of Kikwete's lingering presence in the house that was no longer his.
Tanzania tumechezewa mno. Na kama kuibiwa, tumeibiwa mno. Mimi niko serikalini najua. Kila mahali ni dili, kila mahali ni dili.
When John Pombe Magufuli took the oath of office in November 2015, he did not arrive as a caretaker. He came as a crusader. Within weeks, he upended the rhythm of Tanzanian politics. The country called him the bulldozer. Inside CCM, they called him something else. A storm they had created but could not contain.
Wa viongozi wote wa CCM tuna maviete. Viete unajua wewe? Viete. Ndio tunatembelea sisi.
The old networks of influence, forged through handshakes, envelopes, and silent deals, began to crumble.
Na kwenye CCM humo palikuwa na majambazi kweli kweli. Lazima niwaambie kweli. Najua maneno haya hayawafurahishi sana baadhi. Lakini mimi utabaki kuwa ukweli. Siku mkiamua nikimaliza urais wangu mnifukuze CCM, mtanifukuza nitaenda Chato nitakuwa nachunga mbuzi. Basi.
That statement, uttered by a sitting CCM president, was blasphemy. It was thunder crashing inside the party's own house. The honeymoon was over, and from that moment on, Tanzania would never be the same again. Suddenly, the same men and women who had shaped Tanzanian politics for decades found themselves pushed to the periphery. And at the center of their growing resentment stood one man, former President Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete. Magufuli had locked the gates, and those on the outside wanted back in. In 2017, opposition leader Tundu Lissu of the Chadema party was gunned down in broad daylight. 16 bullets, fired by unknown assailants. He survived, barely. The attack shook the nation. But inside political circles, whispers began to circulate. Sources close to CCM suggested that the hit wasn't just an act of political suppression. It was part of a broader scheme, a coordinated attempt by internal factions within CCM itself to destabilize Magufuli's administration.
Na kwenye CCM humo palikuwa na majambazi kweli kweli.
Akaja Kikwete na maujambazi mengine na kutumia watu kuniua.
If true, that meant the bullets that nearly Lissu weren't just aimed at the opposition. They were aimed at Magufuli's authority.
Paka watu wengine hata wanaingilia uhuru wangu. Wakunambia nifanye hivi. Mimi huyu niingilie, ukiniingilia ndio umeshapoteza kabisa.
By 2019, the power struggle had turned deadly quiet. But something inside him changed. Magufuli became guarded. He drastically cut back his travels, avoided public gatherings, and restructured his entire security detail. Every move became calculated, every word measured. He had sensed danger, not from foreign enemies, but from within his own house. Then, in March 2021, the news broke.
Majira ya saa 12 jioni, tumempoteza kiongozi wetu shupavu, Rais wa Jamhuri ya Muungano.
President John Pombe Magufuli was dead. Official reports claimed heart failure. But for many Tanzanians, and for those who had watched the silent war unfolding inside CCM, the story didn't add up. When you draw a straight line through the events we've discussed, the betrayal, the purge, the picture begins to speak for itself. Magufuli was gone. And into the silence stepped Mama Samia Suluhu Hassan, his calm-voiced deputy. She announced his death, mourned his passing, and within days took the oath as President of the United Republic of Tanzania. To the world, it was a historic moment, Tanzania's first female president. But to those who watched from behind the curtain, it was something else, a return of the old shadow. Because behind those walls, in the hushed corridors of State House, Jakaya Kikwete's hand was once again at work.
Kikwete mwenyewe, rais mstaafu again.
According to multiple voices, including Captain Tesha, Kikwete had reclaimed quiet control of the system. They allege that it was Kikwete, not Samia Suluhu Hassan, who orchestrated the arrests of opposition leaders like Tundu Lissu, who was later charged with treason and held until after the election cycle. To the public eye, it looked like Samia's administration tightening its grip. But according to insiders, it was Kikwete pulling the strings, rebuilding his old network piece by piece, all under the cover of a softer, more diplomatic presidency. Mange and Captain Tesha have both called for Kikwete's arrest, describing him as the man who refuses to let Tanzania breathe. They say he is the architect of the current turmoil, the mind behind the manipulation, the root of every injustice that has ignited fury across the nation. So why did Tanzanians pour into the streets? Not simply because of poverty or inflation or political fatigue, but because of injustice. Because of kidnappings, arrests, and silenced voices. Because of a constitution stretched and abused. Every protest chant, every tear gas cloud, it all pointed back to one man. A man who had mastered the art of ruling from the shadows. A man who never truly left power. He ensured that opposition leaders were jailed before the election, clearing the path for Samia's uncontested re-election. So when the world looks at Samia Suluhu Hassan and points fingers, remember this. She may wear the crown, but the shadow that moves behind her throne still belongs to Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete. He is not gone. He is not forgotten. He is the shadow president of Tanzania.
Niko tayari kusikiliza wenzangu. Tushawishiane kusameheana. Najua kuna mengi ya kusikiliza pia.
It seems the tide has finally turned. A new crack has split through the heart of the CCM party. A visible rift between President Samia Suluhu's allies and those still loyal to former President Jakaya Kikwete. This division tells its own story. Samia and Kikwete are no longer reading from the same script. Why?
Niko tayari kusikiliza wenzangu. Tushawishiane kusameheana. Najua kuna mengi ya kusikiliza pia. Kuna madukuduku, kuna hasira, kuna malalamiko, kuna nongwa.
Because President Samia has reached out, quietly but deliberately, to Tundu Lissu and figures within the opposition, urging them to join the government in an effort to calm the unrest sweeping through Tanzania. But Kikwete's camp is against it. They see reconciliation as betrayal. They would rather keep the old order alive, the networks, the influence, the grip. And that is why, once again, the real conflict inside Tanzania is not about economy or opposition politics. It's about power, and one man's refusal to let it go. For years, Samia Suluhu Hassan was seen as a placeholder, a gentle voice following orders. But today, the tone has changed. Samia wants to become the de facto president, not a pawn in someone else's game. As Tanzania waits to see whether Tundu Lissu and his allies will officially join her government, and as the CCM continues to fracture from within, one question remains. Are we witnessing the beginning of the end of CCM's long rule? From us here at Life Lens TV, our lens remains sharply focused on Tanzania. If the tide shifts again, you can be sure we'll be the first to let you know.